notice chapter 2, verse 11. You see, in chapter 1, Jesus is claimed to be from God, and John is preaching that Jesus is from God, and John the Apostle has written that Jesus was God from the beginning. The question is, how do we believe that? But if you look at chapter 2, verse 11, John writes that this is the beginning of his signs, which he did in Cana of Galilee, and notice these next words, he manifested his glory. That is, Jesus proved that he was who he claimed to be. And his disciples believed on him because of it. And we go through the Gospel of John and we see over and over again that Jesus was able to perform these signs to show that he is the Son of God. In chapter 2, verses 19 through 21, Jesus drove out the money changers from the temple, and the Jews said, "By what authority are you doing these things? Show us a sign, and we'll know that you've got the right to do this." And Jesus says, "Here's the sign, I'll show you. I'm going to destroy this temple and raise it in 3 days." The Jews misunderstood. They thought he was talking about the physical temple. They said, "You can't build this temple in 3 days. It took 46 years to build this temple, and it was still under construction at that time." The disciples didn't understand what Jesus was talking about either until after his resurrection. And then they understood that Jesus was talking about the temple of his body. And so that is a prediction of the resurrection. And of course, we know that that happened. It was a sign that Jesus was who he claimed to be. Oh, the Gospel of John is full of signs. In chapter 4, verse 29, when Jesus was talking to the Samaritan woman at Jacob's well, Jesus again showed supernatural knowledge. He knew what kind of woman she was. He knew what situation she was living in. At the end of chapter 4, Jesus heals a nobleman's son who was sick. And the nobleman realized that it was at the very hour when Jesus says, "Your son will live," that his son was healed. In chapter 5, verse 8, Jesus healed a man who had been lame for 38 years. And the people believed in Jesus when they saw the sign. Jesus tells the Jews on that occasion, in verse 36, he says, "If you don't believe the teaching that I give, believe the works. Believe your eyes. I healed this man miraculously. He was lame for 38 years. Believe your eyes. I am the Son of God." In chapter 6 and verse 14, Jesus fed the 5,000 with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And the multitude believed in him when they saw the sign. Jesus goes on in chapter 6 and verse 19, chapter 10, 37 and 38. In chapter 11 and verse 4, Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. Why? He tells his apostles, so that the Son of Man will be glorified. What does he mean by that? The Son of Man will be proven to be who he claims to be. You see the miracle and you believe the teaching. That's what miracles are for. That's what miracles are for. You see the miracle and you believe the teaching. Jesus performed the miracle of raising Lazarus from the dead, and that gave the people reason to believe that he was the resurrection and the life. And so Jesus performed miracles, signs, as John prefers to call them. But notice what John says at the end of his gospel. Many other signs Jesus did in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, and that believing you may have life in his name. So Jesus was in the bosom of the Father from before the creation of the world. He came to earth and he says, "I have all these blessings that I want to share with you. Living water and food that endures forever. The resurrection to life. Now let me prove to you that I am the one who can offer these things." Well, there were some people who simply did not believe what Jesus had to say. Again, look back in chapter 1. And notice how John summarizes the responses that we see throughout the Gospel of John. In verse 5, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it." In verse 10, John came to his own, that is his own people, the Jewish people, and they did not receive him. The ones who should have been the first to accept Jesus as Messiah, they did not receive him. He came to his own, and those who were his own did not receive him. In John 3 and verse 19, the reason why they did not receive him, Jesus says, because their works were evil. Why aren't there more people in worship this morning across the United States? Because they don't want to have their lives reflected in the light of God's Word. When people's works are evil and they want to continue in those evil works, they don't want to come to worship. They don't want to hear God through His Word say what you're doing is wrong. That's a negative response to the claims of Jesus. In John 6, verse 66, some of Jesus' own disciples turned away and quit walking with Him. And in verses 70 and 71, Jesus specifically mentioned Judas Iscariot, one of His own apostles, was going to betray Him. There are others throughout the Gospel of John, especially John chapter 7. Notice the verses in John chapter 7 that illustrate the negative response that people had to Jesus, even His own brothers. His own physical brothers did not believe that He was the Son of God. They do after the resurrection, but not during His ministry. In chapter 11, verse 47, chapter 12, verse 37, people even wanted to kill Lazarus because other Jews were coming to have faith in Jesus because He raised Lazarus from the dead. You see, the enemies of Jesus never deny the miracles. Even if you look at books outside of the Bible that were written during that time period, Josephus, who was a Jew, Tatian, who was a Roman historian, you go look at those books and they talk about Jesus and they even say Jesus worked miracles. They just don't want to believe His claims. Well, either the miracle is true and He's from God, or the miracle is false and He's a liar. You can't have it both ways. But what John really wants to focus on in the Gospel of John is the positive responses to who Jesus is. Once again, notice in chapter 1, verses 12 and 13, this summary statement about how people respond to Jesus through the Gospel of John. As many as received Him, to them He gave power to become sons of God. Notice that receiving Him doesn't make them sons of God. It gives them the right to become sons of God. You can believe that Jesus is the Son of God, but if you don't obey Him, you're not a son of God yet. You say it takes more than just faith in God that makes one a child. Here, John says, as many as received Him, to them He gave the right to become sons of God, even to those who believe in His name, who were born not of flesh, nor of blood, or the will of man, but of God. And Jesus, of course, told Nicodemus in chapter 3 that you have to be born of water and the Spirit and be baptized in the Christ in order to see the kingdom. But notice how John emphasizes throughout the Gospel, people saw the miracles and they believed the message. They saw the miracles and they believed the message. Many of the world celebrate the birth of Christ on Tuesday. That was a miracle. When a virgin woman became pregnant, conceived, and gave birth to Jesus Christ. That was the beginning of a series of signs that Jesus did to prove to us that He is the Son of God and that He has the right to offer to us the promise, "For I am going, you can come later." So what does Jesus want from us? In John chapter 12 and verse 26, Jesus says, if you want to serve Me, you have to follow Me. In John 14 and verse 15, Jesus says, if you love Me, keep My commandments. If you believe Jesus, then you'll do what He says. And if we do that, then the promises of John 14, verses 1 through 6, will be for us. They'll be ours. Do not be troubled. You believe in God. Believe also in Me. For in My Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. But I go to prepare a place for you, and if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again. And I will receive you unto Myself, that where I am, there you may be also.